Welcome to the SAG-AFTRA Foundation's Conversations at Home program. I'm Michael Slottick from Plug Ugly Films and SAG Indie. Before we're joined by our guest today, I want to let you know that SAG-AFTRA Foundation is a nonprofit organization that relies entirely on donations to provide emergency assistance and free educational programs to SAG-AFTRA artists. This conversation is made possible thanks to the generosity of our supporters. Over the past year, the foundation has given over $6.5 million in COVID relief to more than 7,000 performers. If you are a SAG-AFTRA artist and need help, please ask. And if you can help, please give. Information can be found in the description of this video. Thank you for your support. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Tom Skerritt of East of the Mountains and many other things. But here we're going to be talking about that. Thanks for joining us. I'm particularly excited about this conversation. I'm a big fan of your career for a long time, and in particular, this new film is really a pleasure to watch. Your performance, it's really remarkable, and just the guts of this film. And I'm curious how you came to this project or how it came to you.
Well, of course, it's a Northwest project entirely. Several years ago, I was teaching storytelling to post-traumatic stress vets coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. And David Goodison, who wrote the book East of the Mountains and Snow Falling on Cedars as well, came out to teach a class for me and on storytelling. Afterwards, he asked we talked about East of the Mountains and what a lovely book it was, nice read, soft, easy, moving. And he said, yeah, I'd like to make it into a film someday. And I said, and he wanted me to play that role. And I thought, yeah, I'd really enjoy doing that, particularly if we do it up here in the Northwest, where it was potential to be, intended to be. And he was able to pull the money together, and therein how it lies. We have this very nice, sweet film based on a nice conversation we had 6 or 7 years ago.
So it was really generated by the author of the book, started the project, huh?
Yes, he did.
Wow. Which is it seems like a rare thing for you to hear that. Usually you hear it's either, somebody picked up the rights and the author was not involved at all, or barely listened to, but that's fascinating. And how deep into production was he involved?
Very little, actually. He was just an outside source. I think most writers don't want to necessarily connect up with their work. They'd like to make sure that the directors do what they imagine. But what writers don't often appreciate, because I am a writer as well and a director, but you learn a lot by doing a variety of things, and it all goes into that one thing we make a living doing. So what writers don't seem to realize is what they've designed in the material. It's purely a subjective thing for them. So the creative steps of being the director and then being actors are 3 different steps you have to take, which are generated by the writers. So they don't quite understand. They have to be responsible for everything that follows. And David ultimately, though he wanted certain things left in the movie that were not in the book or his ideal, he was able to adjust to the differences. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think you get my point, is that it all starts with a story. Tell a good story. And those of us who perform or direct these things we have an open book to do a little bit more. And it's added subconsciously, I should say, by the writer itself.
Right, you have to have some leeway. It's a different form. I mean, you're taking it from certainly from a book form to script to acting to editing. So they're different realities.
And in the end, editing is really what it's all about. Yeah. What you got to cut together is what's going to make a movie.
Yeah. So I'm fascinated by the storytelling you were doing with the classes that you teach with vets. Are you still doing that? Does that come from your days in the Air Force, or?
Well, it just comes from the reality of 21 at the time. We have a school up here teaching how to tell a story well. uh, across the board, whatever form that storytelling it falls into. But when I saw 21, 22 guys a day committing suicide coming back 6 or 7 years ago, I just said, we got to go down to Fort Lewis, which is a lot of those soldiers from Fort Lewis came back from there. And that was tough to handle. So I just said, we got to redesign our program to take that down there, because storytelling in the end is really some remarkable way of expressing all those things that are difficult to talk about in an entirely different format rather than living with them, which is post-traumatic stress is basically a 24/7 intensity of having to pay attention to everything that's going on around you, of survival, and how you think about yourself. All those things that happen in the post-traumatic stress really can be written down and exercised very well by knowing how to tell your story. And you only know how to tell your story by telling it and going through the rewrites. And all of that is a very long commitment, but man, it sure gets you there.
Wow. It must be a very different reality from the Hollywood premiere or the big Hollywood set, going to deal with very real trauma and storytelling as different worlds, right?
Oh, quite. Yeah. The reality is that this is the most influential of all media, and we have a responsibility to do the best work we possibly can. Yeah. And that is not necessarily going to drive a blockbuster movie. Mm-hmm. But it's okay to make money on a film. You don't have to make all of it over a weekend. So our whole process is really about, let's lay the story out. Let's engage people in a positive way, so that we don't have the politics we have right now. Because you can take it back to the 70s when I was fell into a lot of creative, not only creative, working and mentoring with guys like Altman and Ashby and Ridley Scott. Mm-hmm. Having that gift of listening to what they say, to how they approach this whole thing was just a gift. Yeah. And they wound up being classics, but they were well crafted to begin with the screenplay, with the idea of it, and then these visual geniuses that were throwing information around right and left. Mm-hmm. I had the gift of that. And that's largely what this conversation comes from, is that determination of telling a good story, because we have the responsibility to do that. How
did the director come on board the project for this?
Oh, well, one of the things that when David and I first started about putting this thing together, we wanted to do it, yes, in Washington. It's intended to be that. But we also really wanted to, I've had this thing about pushing women forward, going back to doing Turning Point, which was about women and ballet and all that, and doing Steel Magnolias, because there were women at the forefront. So we wanted to have a director and a producer that were female and living up here. And that's how we came to our producer and director.
Interesting. Okay. And I'm curious, now you have an executive producer credit on the project. So how deeply into the producing process were you on this, aside from just kind of discovering the material and bringing it forward? Have you been really like deep into the process of producing, or was it mostly concentrating on your role as an actor?
There are two different roads, and it's bringing those two roads together. I was often, and David was saying, well, I would like to see this in a film. And I would say, well, yes, but we have to, and tell him why we could or could not do that because of my experience with it, frame of reference, obviously. And I just found that the production thing was, you got a producer who knows what she's doing, and you got a director that knows what she's doing. You have differences always with the director, and you work those things out as you go along. But being a producer is one thing. I'm not going to actively be with the other producer in combat or whatever it may be, and the director is saying this is what we need economically. I'm not going to do that. I'm hired, when it comes down to it, to be an active thing, and I'm not going to tell the director what to do. Though I make my own alterations. In any case, I make my own adjustment. But I'm not going to get into an argument saying I'm the guy that's responsible for you working on this thing as a director. Nonsense. It's adjusting with and working with a cinematographer. I find that is really a very wholesome approach is to how do I best frame this? Is this look good? How's the mountain in the back? How do we frame it? I'm a painter as well. So I have all these different sources from which I can draw and say, just shut up and do your job, Tom, and be an actor and function as an actor and give them what you feel will work because they will see it later on and understand.
Great. So to that respect, what was it about Ben Givens that you latched onto, personally as well as a performer? Were there certain things that really kind of, aside from the story overall, obviously, but as the character himself?
Well, I know a lot of doctors here, and I see them how emotionally contained they are. Friends of ours and a heart surgeon, and just they're emotionally very, very tight. And professionally, they have to be that way. Generations, or I should say decades, of doing being a heart surgeon, it's difficult to grow out of that emotional containment. Suddenly, here's this guy who's retired after 40 years of habits that he no longer can exercise, and a wife. We're going to go off for a trip to Alaska in a boat, look for teddy bears or something, and she dies. And your daughter is having difficulties with her own marriage, so she's got her issues. And now I'm being told that I may die from cancer, and I'm over 80. How do you put that together realistically? And I'm over 80. So I'm thinking, okay, I can afford to be emotional and outburst. I'm a creative, right, but I'm not a doctor, but I know what it is to emotionally contain yourself when you have to. So that containment is what I saw from emotional containment. What the hell am I going to do? I've got all this stuff. Am I going to, at 80, have all these tubes put in me to save me from cancer? For what? My wife's gone. I don't have my career anymore. Right. My career that made us buy this house, got us this house, maybe another house, and all of that. What do? I'm going to go back and remember what I was as a kid when I was over there in Eastern Mountains doing all that, hunting pheasant and all that sort of thing. So that's how that goes. That's how I process it. We all, men in particular, never lose being a child. You agree with that, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And my wife would agree with it too, probably.
Yeah.
For better or worse.
I have this marvelous lady who leads me around and tells me what to do.
Right, exactly. So it's, I mean, the subtlety of your performance and the tightness of the character, your performance, it made him feel so lived in and so real. One of the scenes that I particularly loved was a really subtle one, the one where he's around the campfire and he finds the joint. It's such a small, humanizing moment for him, and the way you handled it was so small and wonderful but it's one of those moments that don't stand out as like particularly big emotions or acting. But to me, it seems like a very it's one of those scenes that can be very risky, because if you adjust it a little too high or a little too low, you got to hit it just right. And I'm curious how you prepare for everything from a scene where you're breaking down and crying to a scene where you're doing something so small, but it feels so real and lived in?
Yeah, I believe in less is more. The
Mhm.
older I get, the more I understand that. It was like someone once asked Laurence Olivier, how about theater? When you bring your audience to the point where they should cry, how do you get them to cry?
Mhm.
Because you always got to have tricks like that. He said, don't, and they'll cry for you. So that I've never forgotten. Because in fact, the less you get, the more an audience wants. They want to see you laugh. They want to see you cry. No, you as an audience are going to see or feel that I'm not getting something. What is it I want to get from him? I want to see him. Is he going to break down? What's he going to do? Is he going to shoot himself? No, he resurrects what he has left in life by getting back with his daughter and giving a gun to his older brother who he hasn't talked with in years. And I didn't realize that he wanted the gun when Dad died, and I got it. There's little things like that, or the little things in the front of that thing when he's at the beginning of the film, when you're eating a look at a piece of toast with butter on it, and that's all you can eat. Put that down, go over and wash the dish, which is clean probably, and over clean it. But you pick up a sponge that happened to be there, as I did. This is impulse, it's not planned out. You squeeze the sponge, remembering what it was when he was a soldier, how it was when he saved his pal and brought his pal back, and the doctor squeezed the heart of all these subtle little things that never leave you, that really struck you at the moment, but come back at peculiar times. I didn't intend to squeeze the sponge, but it was there. And then, no one's going to necessarily see that, but it affects me.
Yeah. So how much planning or lack thereof do you do when you approach a role like this? Are you an actor that likes to dig into backstory and really talk things through with a director, or do you do less of that?
Less of that. Because I write, because I've directed several of David Kelly's, a couple of his, when I did Picket Fences, several of them, and some other of his shows, and decided I really wanted to be a film. I wanted to do my own work, film my own stuff, which I've not yet had the opportunity to do. But it's just the gift of all of this, and just educates your intelligence, your impulse, your instinct. You can adjust to almost anything that a director is inappropriately telling you. You just be patient, let them say what they have to do, their point of view, and just go in and do what you're going to do anyway. Because ultimately, I generally know better what I need to do for the whole movie rather than for me as an actor. So it's all of that other stuff. I can't really tell you how you feel about it unless you have experienced it. It's that less is more thing. I've had a whole lot of input over the years, remarkable up and down experiences. And what it comes down to is, in the end, is a river does run through this whole thing. And that's it. All in.
So how long was the shoot?
21 days. I worked every day. That was hard.
I was going to ask. So, I mean, you seem so like it's a physically and it's emotionally and physically demanding role. And you seem like you're doing great, man. You seem like you look great. You're like busting through this, these wilderness areas. And I mean, I'm curious how you prepared for a long-ish shoot like that, especially when it's all you, to keep your energy and your focus going.
It's really hard to say, it's your whole life, you become what your whole life has given you. And I've had a lot of extreme downs, a lot of extreme highs emotionally, one way or another. And that's the stuff that just all comes together. I don't plot things out too well. I think that's the more you think, the more you're getting in the way of the creative process. It's what you've come up with instinctively. Pre-planning it gets in the way. It just clutters things, you know.
Yeah.
And then you get into trying to rationalize certain things, and screw that, man. It's just you have this gift that's been given you, and you trust it. You don't flaunt it. You just do the work you have to do. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how to analyze it, give an effective response when you ask me for an effective analytical response, because I just don't. I think it gets in the way. I trust who I am. I know who I am. And all the dislike and things and post-traumatic stress that I've had in my own life because of some experiences long ago, I know how you can use the bad things like post-traumatic stress, of self-loathing and all this stuff. Mm-hmm. You energize it, you just redirect it in a creative way. That it's a discipline that you have in your favor, oddly enough, by having post-traumatic stress, by applying it to your creative outlet, whether it's painting or making a movie or whatever it is. All the agony, all the love, and all that stuff is what you ultimately put into a movie.
And did you train when you were younger, or did you just kind of leap into acting as something that you just did, or did you study anywhere?
God, no. I had a blue collar Detroit factory worker background, mm-hmm. and I knew something was not effective there, that in a way that I would be touched by it. So right out of high school, I joined the service for 4 years. I learned how to discipline some, because I was kind of a loose hair, being blown in the wind, living there. And I knew that I had to go into a different area somehow or another, by creative programs that I got in public school that no longer exists. So I look back on that as a primary gift that I was given when I was a kid, to go out and take the risk of possibilities, because they're not, as long as they're not going to kill you or maim you, the least you can get out of it is to learn. The most you can get out of it is to learn. And I fell into the acting mainly because I wanted to learn how to write. But I'm shy and self-conscious. I don't like to be, or I'm used to talking now to people with other people watching. Acting and theater was the best thing I could do to learn how it felt to be an actor. The challenge of it is very difficult challenge to every night do 8 performances and come through with one performance better than another. But you come through it, however you get through it, you're learning something instinctively and intuitively. So if you live through it, look what you got. Mm-hmm. A gift of all of it. So I happened to be seen doing a movie or doing a play. I was hired to do a little movie, which had Robert Redford and Sidney Pollack in it. I met a television director who happened to be, and I worked with a few little jobs with him, until one day he calls and says, I got a movie called MASH. So I've had this gift given by some other power out there that's beyond anything that we really can imagine, but we can't necessarily visualize it.
Yeah. Well, it's a very different world. I mean, so much of what happens now is people go to acting school, they go through college, and they are funneled into the system. Your generation and generations before you often came from just blue collar backgrounds, out of the service, out of anything, and just were doing what they were doing. And I was just looking at your career, and according to IMDb, you've made over 70 movies and over 100 TV shows. You were just talking about Altman, and you've worked with Robert Altman, Hal Ashby, Ridley Scott, David Cronenberg, Clint Eastwood, Cameron Crowe, Robert Redford, Robert Zemeckis, Gary Marshall, John Carroll Lynch, Anton Fuqua. Was there any moment in particular that you recall as being kind of a life or career changing lesson that you learned from it, working with any of these directors or anyone else? That's something that kind of went, this is how I do it.
Robert Altman.
Yeah.
Robert Altman. As I said, he was just early 60s. I finished English or whatever I wanted. But I think I was an English major at UCLA a long time ago. And I met this TV director. And that was Robert Altman. And then this little film was at Redford and Sidney Pollack. And then so Bob hired me to do some television. He was an interesting guy. And so I went over to, I went to his office, which was in Westwood, not far from where I was living in those days. It was easy to go in and watch him work. And the way he cut films, the way he talked about it, the way he talked about everything, about embrace your cast, embrace your crew, all as one. This is cooperation, getting along with each other. It's not just about acting itself, except that you really have to try to translate everything you get, good and bad, because I've been not so good in some performances because I didn't fit in the character and I didn't know what to do with it at the time. So how I started, it was just learning how to live my life.
So they were the same lessons for life as for the work, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you have any advice for most of the people who will watch this are union members or actors? Any advice for sustaining a long career as an actor? Any or advice for people starting out?
Well, I certainly would say don't get hung up on any one thing. I remember knew a lot of guys back in the 60s and 70s drank a lot of booze, put stuff up their nose and all that stuff to get going. And I experienced it a little bit. I thought, okay, I got it. I got to utilize it the way I am, who I am, what I am. I'm not going to get hung up on. I'm not going to have some other outside source influence me in a way that ultimately is going to alter my life. And that's really, I think, now that I'm verbalizing it, I haven't verbalized it before, but that's it. Just pay attention to who you are, what you are, and do the best you possibly can and continue to improve every day, every day.
Well, you're really remarkable, and it's wonderful to see your work. The subtlety of it is just fantastic. So I'm going to segue and say goodbye and appreciate your time here. It was really wonderful talking to you. It's an honor talking to you for sure.
And the same to you too, Michael.
Yeah. So on behalf of the SAG-AFTRA Foundation, I want to thank you for sharing your remarkable and vast experiences, your process in the craft with your fellow performers at SAG-AFTRA.